Jonathan thought his marriage was unbreakable, until he uncovered his wife Laura's secret affair with her powerful boss. Driven by betrayal and heartbreak, Jonathan meticulously plans his revenge, not only to expose her deceit but to dismantle the life of the man who helped destroy his. As his scheme unfolds, Jonathan successfully ruins Edward's career and leaves Laura begging for forgiveness. But in the pursuit of justice, Jonathan overlooks the deeper wounds his actions inflict. When tragedy strikes, he's left to confront the ultimate cost of revenge and the love lost in its wake. A gripping tale of betrayal, retribution, and the haunting aftermath, this story asks, how far would you go when trust is broken? The crisp autumn air seemed heavier that October evening. Laura bustled about the house, preparing for yet another work trip, her tone light but distant. I sat on the edge of our bed, watching her pack with a precision that betrayed no emotion. Each neatly folded blouse, each pair of heels tucked into her suitcase, felt like another brick in the wall she was building between us. "I'll only be gone for 3 days," she said, glancing at me briefly before turning back to the suitcase. "It's the regional marketing conference, you know how these things are." I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Of course. You'll be back Sunday evening?" "That's the plan," she replied. Her words sounded casual, but the way she avoided my eyes left a sour taste in my mouth. For months, Laura had been slipping away, not physically, but emotionally. The laughter we once shared now felt rehearsed, the late-night talks replaced by her scrolling endlessly on her phone. My friends joked about the marriage slump, that inevitable period when the spark dims and life becomes routine. But this wasn't routine, it was something deeper, something I couldn't name. As Laura zipped her suitcase, I noticed a flicker of hesitation in her movements. It was brief, but it was there. "What time's your flight?" I asked, feigning interest. "Early," she said. "I should get to bed soon." She kissed me on the cheek, a fleeting, mechanical gesture, and disappeared into the bathroom. Left alone in our bedroom, I stared at her suitcase. The gut feeling I had been ignoring for months roared to life. I had no concrete reason to doubt her, yet an overwhelming urge to investigate took hold. I stood, hesitant at first, but then moved to her suitcase. The zipper slid open with a soft hiss, revealing its contents. Everything seemed ordinary at first: work clothes, toiletries, a tablet. But then, buried beneath a stack of blouses, I found it, a red dress. It was sleek, satin, and completely unlike anything Laura usually wore. She hated red. My chest tightened. The dress wasn't just a piece of fabric, it was a neon sign flashing in my face. I held it up, letting the silky material drape over my hands. 1,000 questions raced through my mind, each more damning than the last. Why was she bringing this to a work conference? Why had she never mentioned buying it? And most importantly, why hadn't she worn it for me? Before I could spiral further, I heard the bathroom door click open. Panicked, I shoved the dress back into the suitcase and zipped it closed. Laura stepped into the room, her damp hair framing her face. She smiled faintly, oblivious to my racing heart. "You okay?" she asked, slipping into bed. I nodded, forcing a yawn to mask my nerves. "Yeah, just tired." She accepted the lie without question, turning off the bedside lamp. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling as doubt gnawed at me like a persistent rat. The red dress wasn't just a dress, it was a crack in the facade of our marriage, a sign that something wasn't right. The next morning, Laura left before sunrise. Her goodbye was brief, punctuated by a half-hearted hug and a promise to call when she landed. As I watched her car disappear down the street, a gnawing sense of betrayal settled in my gut. I couldn't let this go. I needed answers. I started small, checking her phone records. It wasn't something I'd ever done before, but desperation has a way of pushing boundaries. Her call log was filled with the usual names: friends, colleagues, her mother. But one number stood out, a number I didn't recognize that appeared almost daily. It was there in the morning, late at night, even during the hours she was supposedly at work. I wrote the number down and called it, disguising my voice. A man answered, his tone polished and confident. "Edward speaking." I hung up immediately, my heart pounding. Edward. I knew that name. He was Laura's boss, a man she spoke about often, always professionally, never personally. But now, his name felt like a curse, a taint on everything we'd built. Over the next few days, I became consumed with uncovering the truth. I hacked into her email, a skill I'd picked up in college and never thought I'd need again. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. In her drafts folder, there was a letter addressed to Edward. It wasn't a professional memo or a casual note, it was a confession. Laura wrote about their weekends together, about how he made her feel alive in a way I apparently never could. I stared at the screen, my world crumbling around me. The words blurred as rage and heartbreak collided in my chest. This wasn't just a fling, this was a betrayal on a level I couldn't fathom. When Laura returned from her trip, I pretended everything was normal. I greeted her with a smile, helped her unpack, and listened to her fabricated stories about the conference. But beneath the surface, I was a volcano waiting to erupt. The following weeks were a blur of silent rage and calculated planning. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. I needed a plan, something that would ensure she felt the weight of her actions. She had taken something precious from me, and I intended to take everything from her in return. The days following Laura's return passed in a tense haze. She carried on as though nothing had changed, completely unaware that I knew everything. Her cheerful facade grated on me, and every shared laugh or tender touch felt like a mockery. I played along, though, biding my time. Revenge wasn't just about justice, it was about precision. The first step in my plan was gathering more evidence. The emails were damning, but I needed something irrefutable. Something physical. I needed to know how deep this went, whether Edward was just a fling or if their betrayal was a cornerstone of her life. Late one night, while Laura slept, I accessed her phone again. This time, I dug deeper into her apps, her messages, her calendar. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Buried in a hidden folder were photos, candid shots of her and Edward together. They weren't explicit, but the intimacy in their expressions said it all. A photo of them sipping wine on what appeared to be a private terrace. Another of her leaning into him, her smile brighter than it had been in years. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the images. These weren't moments of fleeting passion, they were snapshots of a life she had built behind my back. I found more, too. Plane tickets she hadn't mentioned, charged to a card I didn't know she had. Reservations at high-end restaurants. And then, the final blow, a receipt for a weekend at a luxury resort under both their names. The date? The same weekend she'd told me she was visiting her sister. I shut the phone and slipped it back onto her nightstand, my hands trembling. This wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage, it was a betrayal of the life we'd built, the trust we'd shared. She had lied to my face, repeatedly, without an ounce of guilt. By morning, the rage had settled into something colder, sharper. I called in sick to work and drove into the city, parking outside Edward's office building. I knew it was risky, but I needed to see him, to put a face to the man who had dismantled my life. Edward emerged just after noon, stepping out of a sleek black car. He was exactly as I'd imagined, tall, polished, exuding the kind of arrogance that comes with unchecked power. He didn't look like a man racked with guilt. He looked smug. Self-assured. Like a man who believed he had the world at his feet. As I watched him stride into the building, a plan began to take shape. Confronting Laura wouldn't be enough. I needed to destroy Edward too. If he thought he could dismantle my life without consequences, he was sorely mistaken. I spent the next week laying the groundwork. Using a combination of my IT skills and contacts in the industry, I hacked into Edward's professional network. It was surprisingly easy, his password was embarrassingly weak. Once inside, I unearthed a treasure trove of shady dealings, forged expense reports, inappropriate messages to other female colleagues, even a couple of questionable financial transactions that hinted at embezzlement. The deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. Edward wasn't just a cheater, he was a fraud. I compiled everything into a neat little package, complete with timestamps and incriminating screenshots. It was more than enough to ruin his career. My next step was Laura. I couldn't let her off the hook, but I also couldn't afford to lose control. I needed to confront her in a way that would leave no doubt about my intentions. One evening, while she was out with friends, I packed a bag and checked into a nearby hotel. From there, I drafted a letter. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs outlining everything I knew. The photos, the emails, the receipts. I laid it all bare, ending with a simple ultimatum: leave. By the time you finish reading this, I will have filed for divorce. I attached the evidence and left the letter on her pillow. I didn't return home that night. Instead, I waited at the hotel, my phone buzzing incessantly with messages from Laura. At first, they were confused. Then panicked. By midnight, they turned desperate. She begged me to come home, to let her explain, to give her a chance to make things right. But there was no making this right. The following morning, I received a call from my lawyer confirming the divorce papers had been filed. It was a small victory, but it felt hollow. I had wanted this, needed this, but the weight of the betrayal lingered. That evening, I returned home to find Laura waiting for me. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She clutched the letter in one hand, the evidence folder in the other. "John, please," she started, her voice trembling. "I can explain." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Then explain," I said coldly. She hesitated, her lip quivering. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said finally. "I never meant for it to happen. Edward, he—" "Stop," I interrupted. "Don't you dare try to paint yourself as the victim. You chose this, Laura. You lied, you cheated, and you betrayed me. You don't get to blame anyone else." Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. Whatever love I'd had for her had been snuffed out the moment I found that first email. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "But I still love you, John. I can fix this. We can fix this." I shook my head. "No, we can't. It's too late for that." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. I watched her for a moment, a strange mix of anger and pity churning in my gut. Then I turned and walked out the door. There was still more to be done. Edward might have taken my wife, but I was about to take everything else from him. I didn't feel relief or satisfaction as I left the house that evening, leaving Laura in her mess of tears and regret. Instead, I felt empty, like a man walking through the aftermath of a battlefield with no clear victor. But I didn't have time for self-pity. There was still Edward. Destroying him required precision. The evidence I'd collected would undoubtedly ruin him, but timing was everything. If I moved too soon, he might have the chance to spin the narrative or mitigate the damage. No, I needed to strike when it would hurt the most. Over the next few days, I immersed myself in Edward's world. I studied his professional schedule, his social media posts, and even the online chatter about his company. I learned that he was on the verge of securing a lucrative partnership, a merger that would solidify his standing in the industry. It was set to be announced at an exclusive gala the following Friday. Perfect. The plan was simple yet devastating. I prepared an anonymous package containing all the incriminating evidence, complete with a concise summary of his misconduct. The package would go to 3 recipients: the board of directors at his firm, his wife, and the journalist responsible for a prominent business column in the city's leading newspaper. The day before the gala, I sent the packages via courier, timing their delivery to coincide with the peak of his celebratory weekend. By the time the gala began, Edward's world would already be crumbling. But I wasn't done. Laura was still trying to contact me, leaving voicemails and texts that ranged from desperate apologies to angry accusations. I ignored them all until she finally showed up at my office, demanding to see me. She looked terrible, disheveled, with dark circles under her eyes. It was a stark contrast to the composed, confident woman I'd once loved. "John, we need to talk," she said, her voice pleading. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. "About what?" "You've already said everything that matters." She stepped closer, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I made a mistake, okay? I was stupid and selfish, but it didn't mean anything. I still love you." Her words stung, but I kept my composure. "You don't betray someone you love," I said simply. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the photos, the emails, the months of deception. No amount of tears could erase that. "I'll do anything," she said, her voice breaking. "Just tell me how to fix this." I stood, towering over her as I leaned across the desk. "You can't fix this, Laura. You shattered it. And now you'll have to live with the consequences." I walked past her and out of the office, leaving her standing there, stunned and silent. The following evening, the gala unfolded just as I had hoped. Edward arrived dressed to the nines, his smug grin plastered across his face as he schmoozed with potential partners and influential guests. But the atmosphere shifted as whispers spread through the crowd. Phones buzzed with notifications, and faces turned toward Edward with looks of shock and disgust. It didn't take long for the journalist's exposé to hit the news feeds. Headlines blared about financial improprieties, workplace misconduct, and an affair that had entangled both his professional and personal life. The story was meticulously detailed, backed by the evidence I had provided. I wasn't at the gala, but a friend who worked at the venue later told me about the scene. Edward's wife, a statuesque woman with a sharp tongue, publicly confronted him, her voice cutting through the elegant ambience like a knife. "How dare you humiliate me like this," she had screamed before throwing her drink in his face. The board members huddled together, visibly panicked, while Edward stood frozen, his carefully curated image unraveling before everyone's eyes. By the end of the night, he was effectively exiled, both personally and professionally. The partnership was off the table, his marriage in shambles, and his career circling the drain. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I felt nothing. Revenge had been my lifeline, but now that it was complete, I was left with an emptiness I couldn't ignore. The next morning, Laura showed up at the hotel where I was staying. She looked exhausted, her makeup streaked from crying. "I know it was you," she said, her voice shaking. "The exposé. The evidence. You did this to him." I didn't deny it. And Anne. "I deserved it," she admitted, her shoulders sagging. "We both did. I betrayed you, and he used me. I don't even know who I am anymore." Her honesty surprised me, but it wasn't enough to undo the damage. "You're someone who made a choice," I said. "And now you're living with it." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "But I still love you, John. I know I've lost your trust, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it back. Just, don't give up on us." I looked at her, the woman I had once thought would stand by me through anything. Her pain was raw, her remorse genuine. But some wounds don't heal, no matter how much time passes. "I don't think I can," I said finally. "Too much has been broken." She didn't argue, just nodded as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered before turning and walking away. As she disappeared down the hall, I felt the weight of everything crash down on me. The betrayal, the revenge, the loss, it was all too much. I had won, but at what cost? Standing alone in that hotel room, I realized that revenge had given me closure, but it hadn't given me peace. That would be something I'd have to find on my own. The weeks after Laura walked away blurred together in a fog of monotony. I returned to work, pretending everything was normal, but inside, I was hollow. Edward's destruction had brought no joy, no closure, only a lingering sense of emptiness. I thought cutting ties with Laura would bring clarity, but instead, it left a void I didn't know how to fill. Laura tried reaching out a few times, sending long, heartfelt emails that I deleted without reading. Her voicemails piled up, each one more desperate than the last. Part of me wanted to call her back, to tell her I understood, that I was willing to try. But every time I picked up the phone, my pride stopped me. One rainy evening, as I sat alone in the dim light of my apartment, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from a mutual friend, Katie, someone Laura and I had known for years. The message was brief but jarring. "John, call me. It's about Laura." A cold dread settled in my stomach as I dialed her number. Katie answered almost immediately, her voice heavy with emotion. "John, I don't know how to tell you this," she began, her words trembling. "It's Laura, she's gone." I froze. "What do you mean, gone?" She took her own life," Katie said, choking back tears. "I'm so sorry, John." The world around me seemed to collapse. My phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor as Katie's voice faded into the background. "Laura. Gone." The words echoed in my mind, refusing to sink in. I sat in silence for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the walls. Memories of her flooded my mind, her laugh, her smile, the way she used to hum while cooking dinner. The betrayal, the lies, they all seemed insignificant in the face of this new reality. The funeral was held a few days later, a small, somber affair. I stood at the back of the room, watching as friends and family gathered to say goodbye. Laura's parents, her sister, even Edward's wife, people I hadn't seen in years, were there. Edward wasn't. As I approached the casket, the weight of my guilt became unbearable. I had wanted her to suffer, to feel the pain she had caused me, but not like this. Never like this. A letter was handed to me after the service, written in Laura's handwriting. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "John. I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. What I did was unforgivable. I betrayed you, the one person who truly loved me, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But there's something I need you to know, I never stopped loving you. Even when I was at my worst, even when I was lying to your face, you were the only thing that kept me grounded. Edward was a mistake I can't take back. But you were everything. I wish I could undo the pain I caused, but I can't. And I can't live with the weight of it anymore. I'm so sorry, John. Please know that I loved you, even when I didn't deserve to. Laura." I clutched the letter, tears streaming down my face. The words blurred as I reread them over and over, searching for some clue, some sign that I had missed, that might have saved her. In the days that followed, I tried to move forward, but the weight of Laura's death clung to me like a shadow. Her absence was a constant reminder of the life we had shared, the choices we had made, and the love we had lost. One evening, as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I found myself sifting through old photo albums. There we were, young and happy, oblivious to the struggles that would one day tear us apart. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. It was a small, fleeting moment, but it was something. As I closed the album, a thought struck me: revenge had cost me everything. It had consumed me, blinded me, and in the end, left me with nothing but regret. Laura was gone, and no amount of guilt or sorrow could change that. The tragedy wasn't just her death, it was the love we let slip away. In the pursuit of justice, I had lost sight of what truly mattered. And now, it was too late. I walked to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked city below. Somewhere, Laura's voice lingered in the silence, a faint echo of what could have been. And for the first time, I allowed myself to mourn, not just for her, but for the life we had destroyed together.